In the summer of 2023, everywhere you looked was pink. Greta Gerwig's Barbie, the biggest movie event since the pandemic, dominated the culture. For the better part of a year, you couldn't escape this film. She's everything, he's just Ken memes flooded social media. Every pink dress worn by Margot Robbie inspired a think piece. Buses and benches got wrapped in pink vinyl. A big part of the promotion before and during its release revolved around the film's lack of visual effects. The film's marketing team repeatedly emphasized the movie's use of practical sets, miniatures, and painted backdrops. The Guardian published an article titled, "It's Exactly as They'd Have Done It in the 1910s, How Barbenheimer is Leading the Anti-CGI Backlash." The article interviews Sarah Greenwood, the production designer of Barbie. She said that there's, quote, "still an audience for what we do. It was very painstaking, but I'm sure having 500 visual effects guys working away in the dark is also very painstaking. It's just much more fun the way we do it," end quote. But of course, they did use visual effects. There were at least 1,300 visual effects shots in Barbie. While the film did not have 500 visual effect guys working in the dark, it still had 207 visual effects artists named in the credits. There were probably more who didn't even get acknowledged. More and more blockbusters are downplaying the work of visual effects artists, going so far as to actually have visual effects artists digitally alter behind-the-scenes footage to remove blue screen to make sets seem more realistic. But why?
Hollywood PR machines are always really interested in saying this film is completely practical effects. It's all in front of the camera. It's not a CGI film. Or if it's animation, this is handmade. This is the work of the animators, like direct manipulations of the material.
This is Deborah Levitt, media historian, theorist, and associate professor in culture and media studies at the New School.
But when you look at a lot of films that are marketed that way, I mean, Mad Max Fury Road, I think, is a really good example because, yes, they did do a lot of chases and a lot of stunts in front of the camera, but there was so much CGI in that film. And it's interesting to me, why is it that we feel the need to disavow the function of computation and animation?
Not only is the use of visual effects denied, when it's used, it can result in a scandal. In the movie Blood Diamond, the director digitally added a tear to Jennifer Connelly's face in post-production.
There was this big outcry about that, like in Variety and, in kind of the industry discussion that filtered down into the popular press. And it's interesting because it's like, how is that different from putting a drop of water onto an actor's face when they're playing a scene? And I think what's disturbing to people about it is that it disrupts the unity of performance, or the idea that we as beings exist in one time and one place. And it sort of distributes being across a number of different sites and across a number of different times. And it seems like there's something about that we're like beside ourselves. That's a piece of what's newly uncanny.
I'm your host, Donna Honarpisheh, and this is Tomorrow is the Problem. We've spent this season exploring the uncanny, and today, in our last episode of the season, we're going to talk about the relationship between the digital uncanny and reality. As we've discussed, the uncanny is a concept popularized by Freud in his 1919 essay Das Unheimliche, The Uncanny. In a departure from his previous writings, which focused on case studies of patients and their symptoms, Freud turns to the aesthetic in this essay, making it somewhat of a curious anomaly across his corpus. In the essay, Freud analyzes the work of Ernst Theodor Hoffmann, a Gothic horror writer.
It's a really unusual essay in his overall work because it is mainly a literary and cultural analysis. And while there are a few anecdotes about case histories, they're very few and far between.
For Freud, the uncanny is, quote, that class of the terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar, end quote. He walks the reader through various examples in stories and plays that evoke this feeling, mainly The Sandman by Hoffmann. While it may seem a bit odd for a psychologist to turn their analysis towards pop culture, Freud believed that art could serve as a valuable reference for psychoanalysts.
And he says at the beginning that while it's not a psychoanalyst's normal province to think about issues of aesthetics, there are certain kinds of aesthetic concepts or feelings that are not as much covered in the literature of the field, like of art or literary studies, but are germane to psychoanalysis. And the uncanny, he says, is a particular species of what is considered frightening or eerie. And in the essay, he tries to probe what makes the uncanny a specific type of fear or affect or response. And one thing is that sometimes when people talk about the uncanny, they talk about it as if it were a state of affairs in the world. But for Freud, the uncanny is very much a feeling.
Freud believed that the uncanny, quote, undoubtedly belongs to all that is terrible, to all that arouses dread and creeping horror. It is equally certain, too, that the word is not always used in a clearly definable sense, end quote. While the uncanny contains parallels to feelings of dread and horror, it's not a synonym for horror. It's a very specific kind of dread, one that's only evoked when certain lines become blurry, the line between the living and the dead, human and non-human, animate and inanimate.
One of the main categories of the uncanny that he highlights is this kind of feeling of unease that can be generated when you're not sure whether a particular character is alive or like animate or inanimate, living or dead, human or non-human. So he talks about quite a number of other features of the uncanny, including déjà vu or having the same number come up several times in the same day, things that are more specifically related to superstitions and the evil eye, which is a whole interesting thing in itself. But the way it's been most picked up in relation to looking at contemporary culture is around this question of epistemological hesitation and a feeling of discomfort when you don't know if something is alive or not, or human or not.
And with the rapid advancement of image manipulation and AI-generated imagery, a new kind of uncanniness emerges. Levitt's book, The Animatic Apparatus, Animation, Vitality, and the Futures of the Image, revolves around how the evolution in images affects our understanding of reality. It has become increasingly difficult to look at an image and know whether or not it has been altered or whether or not it's AI. The line between real and not real starts to feel a bit blurry.
What I was grappling with in that book is the way the status of the image seems to change between the 20th and the 21st century, in the sense that in the 20th century, photography and film, I would say, were the dominant cultural image media in terms of like structuring the cultural imaginary around what an image is. And even though everybody knew that photographs could be staged, images could be manipulated, that film editing could accomplish all sorts of magic tricks, there was a general sense that, like, if you saw a photograph, that photograph represented a real situation that unfolded in front of the camera at a particular point.
In an essay for The Verge titled "No One's Ready for This," Sarah Zhang writes, quote, "We briefly lived in an era in which the photograph was a shortcut to reality, to knowing things, to having a smoking gun. It was an extraordinarily useful tool for navigating the world around us. We are now leaping headfirst into a future in which reality is simply less knowable. What will it mean to live in a world where we can create a photorealistic image of anything we can imagine in a matter of seconds?"
Now, I think the general assumption is that we don't ever know if an image is real. And like, I'm sort of putting that in the academic air quotes, or whether it's synthetic or CGI or manipulated. And one of the reasons that feels very much linked to how people since before Freud have thought about the uncanny is because the idea that there's a reality on one side of a camera and a spectacle on the other side is disturbed.
The distortion of reality occurs on micro and macro scales. In a global context, our changing relationship with images plays a large role in the proliferation of fake news. Deborah Levitt thinks that we're currently living in a kind of pre-history, post-truth era.
In the conclusion of the book, I write about Trump's inauguration in his first term, and particularly his claim that he had the largest crowds at the inauguration of any president ever. It was incredibly clear from all evidence, whether it was photos or DC metro ridership statistics, that wasn't true. But because he said it was true, there was this response of publishing all these images, publishing these statistics about DC travel. And it just dawned on me that once you're doing that, it's already clear that the image has lost its evidentiary power. Because if you looked at the images of Trump's inauguration versus Obama 2008, it's so obvious that the crowd was way bigger at Obama's inauguration. So then it's crazy that you have mainstream news organizations even engaging in this argument. And to me, it just showed how much the terrain of something like a public sphere has shifted.
And on the personal level, filters and Facetune allow individuals to easily alter their digital appearance. As we create and consume more and more altered images, our understanding of what a real face and body looks like begins to shift.
We're all part of this spectacle. We're all sort of creating it inside of it. And it's not very clear at this point where the image ends and something like the real body or the real world begins.
The uncanny exists in the blurred line between categories we want to be clearly defined: human and non-human, animate and inanimate, alive and dead. In theory, technologies like CGI should consistently evoke the uncanny because they soften the boundaries of these categories, but they don't. Most people did not feel creeped out when they watched the Barbie movie or Oppenheimer or the Avengers. However, the marketing downplaying their visual effects suggests that the knowledge of image manipulation, perhaps undetectable image manipulation, could create some unease in the audience.
When things are digitized, it just opens up post-production as like a whole new arena for producing images that has more in common in many ways with traditions of animation than it does with traditions of classical cinema. And the media theorist Lev Manovich is sort of famous for arguing that cinema, or what we think of as cinema, is just a short chapter in a long history of animation.
Here, Deborah's referencing Lev Manovich's essay, What is Digital Cinema? In it, Manovich writes,
"Cinema's most basic gesture is to open the shutter and to start the film rolling, recording whatever happens to be in front of the lens."
He continues,
"But what happens to cinema's indexical identity if it is now possible to generate photorealistic scenes entirely in a computer using 3D computer animation? To modify individual frames or whole scenes with the help of a digital paint program, to cut, bend, 3D-stretch, and stitch digitized film images into something which has perfect photographic credibility, although it was never actually filmed."
He concludes that, quote, cinema can no longer be clearly distinguished from animation. It is no longer an indexical media technology, but rather a subgenre of painting.
Now that CGI can sort of create photorealistic characters, there isn't really an uncanny valley anymore.
The uncanny valley is a concept coined by robotics professor Masahiro Mori. Picture a graph. On the x-axis is how much an object looks like a human. The y-axis measures how much we emotionally connect to that object. So, a rock, for example, is low on both counts. But if we put googly eyes on that rock, it starts to look a bit more human, and we start to like it a bit more. A doll looks even more human, and we can connect to it even more. This upward pattern follows until we get things that look almost human. This category includes the creepy CGI baby from Twilight, the dead-eyed animated characters in The Polar Express, Dwayne Johnson in The Scorpion. These images resemble humans far more closely than, say, the rock with googly eyes, but they repulse us, so the pattern dips down. That dip is the uncanny valley. But we've climbed out of that valley. When the imitation of humanity becomes indistinguishable from real humans, we no longer feel repulsion. The uncanny valley doesn't only refer to images. Things like Alexa and ChatGPT imitate humanity, albeit non-visually. Whether or not these technologies have climbed out of the uncanny valley is a matter of perspective. As we become more comfortable with artificial intelligence, it becomes more difficult for that technology to make us feel uneasy.
There are so many ways in which our interactions with technology now that would have been considered like completely bizarre and uncanny in the past are not uncanny now, because we've like moved into a realm where images and bodies are more interchangeable and qualities can be distributed across them. So I think that there are ways that thinking about the feeling of the uncanny is interesting in relation to thinking about how people interact with conversational agents like Chat GPT or Claude. And there have been real ethical issues. And it's also interesting to sort of speculate about if that mode of the uncanny has shifted in the sense that we accept a certain kind of vitality or human likeness of non-human entities. What is it today that does inspire uncanny feelings?
Similarly to how Freud turned toward Gothic horror literature to try and understand the uncanny, we can turn towards artists to try and understand the new uncanny. Our next guest, Adam Putnam, is a visual artist who works in photography, drawing, sculpture, and film to examine the social and aesthetic dimensions of human bodies, often by pushing the physical limits of his own. As we move into this era where photographs are no longer indexes to reality, and we regularly interact with technology that imitates humanity, Putnam's work offers a valuable way for us to understand the new lines between human and non-human, animate and inanimate, real and surreal.
I don't go into the studio thinking about surrealism, but like the uncanny, it was something that was an early influence. And also, you know, as a young artist, like seeing surrealist artwork kind of gives you permission to do something other than what's sort of out of the box. Like, oh, you're in a life drawing class, or you're going to draw this, or you're going to make a picture that tells this story.
Adam allows himself to follow his impulses. Sometimes he creates faster than he can think.
It's almost cultivating a way of working or telling stories that allows continuous accident or chance to enter into what could otherwise be a straightforward process.
Adam follows his curiosity across mediums. He's worked in live performance, photography, sculpture, drawing, and painting. In every medium, he seems to return to a similar subject, bodies in space.
I was just recently digging through some work that I made 20 years ago, and I'll just say that what I saw was a lot of drawings of empty interior spaces. And so when I said that I started off as a performer, I think one of the things that also happened was that while I was doing pieces where I was basically hanging from ceilings, stuffing myself into furniture, really kind of out there stuff, I was also, I think in my own way, exploring how bodies and people move through architecture and fit comfortably or uncomfortably into spaces. I mean, that's a really broad topic, but I think that kind of confusion between interior and exterior bodies and architecture has always been with me in overt ways and maybe more subtle ways.
The blurring between interior and exterior, body and architecture, creates this strange dynamic where Adam's body often feels integrated into the architecture of spaces. But the spaces that he inhabits or depicts often feel haunted. There's a displacement of the soul, or rather, there's a displacement of vitality. The body becomes dehumanized and the architecture personified.
Lately, that kind of interior-exterior thing has been expressed more poignantly through an exploration of my interior kind of psyche. A lot of the work I've been doing over the past probably since COVID, I would say, has really been diving into the subconscious and kind of trying to pull out images that aren't so much following a specific idea, but are sort of more organic, like kind of erupt out of this sort of dark, more unknowable place. So that's another way also, I think, that interior-exterior maybe is still dancing around each other.
In Putnam's recent works, he thinks with the dream world as a way to explore that interior psyche. What is the role of dreams in your work? And, how do you think about dreams in waking life, and how does it come through in your practice?
I started becoming aware of my dreams maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. I think I've always dreamt. At various points in my life, I would record the dreams. I wouldn't take them that seriously, but I think because I had sort of embraced this process of trying to cross that threshold between the subconscious and the conscious, the dreams got more vivid. And so I was kind of, on some level, I told myself that I was mining them for content, or, I was pulling things out, even if they didn't make sense to me, or if it doesn't, it's not even, I wouldn't even say that they're very personal. It's just images that arise. But I also, having said that, I think that maybe the dreams, or the idea of dreaming, has always been with me as well,
Adam's dreams became the foundation for a series of ink drawings called visualizations.
What they are small, roughly 4-inch by 5.5-inch pieces of paper, almost entirely ink. I guess painting, drawings, I don't know what you'd call them. And they started off also as a little side project, an uncensored, unfiltered. It began right out during lockdown, and just kind of cultivating these images, either from dreams or the unconscious, or just daydreaming or meditating. And I'd make a few, and at first I had 30 of them. I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. And I just wasn't showing them to anybody. It was just classic. And they just kept growing and growing until I had this huge stack.
At first glance, the images seem totally unrelated. Visualization 306 depicts a mask against a blue background. Visualization 354 depicts a brick wall with 3 arched cased openings. Visualization 150 is an abstract smear of blues, whites, greens, browns, and purples. However, a visual cohesion begins to emerge when the images are grouped together. The drawings have identical proportions and were made with identical materials. Each one is slightly off-putting in its own way. It's a bit like being inside of a dream.
What the visitors saw when they entered the show was we made a labyrinth, a maze, literally, of wooden tables covered in plexiglass and just lined with 360 small images, so that the experience is also kind of like how they come. The maze is actually really a Freudian kind of symbol, I guess. People could wander around. There's no beginning, middle, and end, and they could just sort of spend time and lose themselves in the images.
Not only does his maze of images physically transform the room, visualizations, by encouraging this feeling of being lost, changes the audience member's perception of the space. He's trying to physicalize the non-physical space of dreams.
Visualizations are, in fact, my attempt at visualizing or externalizing something that happens very fleetingly, either in dreams or in meditation, where just images come into your head. And I was trying to approach those almost like doodling, or just something that was unedited. Mm-hmm. And that translation process was really interesting to me, because I told myself that I wasn't going to worry about whether or not I got it right or not. It's not like I'm drawing from life, in other words.
Despite these acts of translation, audience members still recognize their own dreams in Adam's visualizations. These surreal pictures reveal a shared subconscious reality, even if it's one we don't fully understand.
One of the visualizations might be very figurative or very illustrative. And those are the ones that I assume everyone would sort of gravitate to. But I've been surprised, because there's a lot of them that are very abstract and just strange. What I see in them is not what other people see in them. And because they're small, the encounter with them also feels small and personal. And so I end up having lots of conversations with people who've either acquired one or had thoughts about them. And it's been an interesting process.
If visualizations offer a view into the dreamscape, Reclaimed Empire invites participants to walk straight through it. Reclaimed Empire was a 10-year project that ran from 2008 to 2018. Like visualizations, it consists of a series of images that at first glance have no relationship to each other. Arms covered in gauze, empty door frames, cloudy skies, a shadow against a wall. Unlike visualizations, these images are digital vignettes, small videos rather than ink drawings. These vignettes are projected against a wall. The visuals are accompanied by an eerie soundtrack of bells and chimes. As we cycle through the images of Reclaimed Empire, a few visual motifs arise. The piece keeps returning to images of entrances, doorways, portals, windows.
Portals, portholes, that's the entry point. I love that, thinking about however it exists, that sort of threshold between one thing and another. I love the idea of prosceniums or empty stages. You know, it's maybe growing up on David Lynch or who knows, that kind of like in between space.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a huge influence. And I think about that a lot too. Like, you know, there's the one or the other of these binaries of like inside, outside, body architecture, whatever it is. But what's that threshold in between? That just seems like such always rich, fertile territory. Or waking and dreaming, you know, conscious and unconscious.
Adam captured footage for Reclaimed Empire with a relatively old, cheap camera. He originally planned to use a nicer camera, but someone broke into his studio and stole it. Reclaimed Empire has a graininess that's become unfamiliar in the smartphone age. The images aren't lit well. Things aren't always in focus.
There's something that I'm always drawn to, and I don't know why, about kind of seeing something through a haze or seeing something through darkness. And so I think that looking at imagery that's shot with somewhat degraded technology, you're sort of looking through something. You're not seeing it exactly. So it kind of goes back to that idea of also seeing things kind of like from the edges in, like you sort of work your way in. You're not getting everything all at once as you do with a crisp image. Although there's something really alluring about that as well. It's just finding a way to kind of interject that kind of process that isn't so set in stone.
At the present moment, Adam is working on a sort of sequel to Reclamations. This new work won't use video. It will be a sculpture series.
I've started carving wood. So like I haven't really even picked up a camera in a while. I've just been carving body parts out of fallen tree limbs that I've been obsessively collecting. My studio looks ridiculous now. So in some ways, the sequel to Reclaimed Empire is probably not going to be another video. It's going to be sculptures, like a literal Reclaimed Empire, but reclaimed out of reclaimed wood, reclaimed body parts. I had another kind of strange moment when I was looking around my studio at all these like wooden broken body parts and thinking about all the footage that we were all witnessing on the television, just, you know, the wars that are happening. And I was like, oh, that's what's happening. It was sort of a reminder of like how the unconscious works, like whether you are aware of it or not. I mean, quite literally, things sort of emerge without even me thinking about it. And so I think that's both a sort of a refreshing, inspiring idea, but it's sort of like, wow, okay.
This project is still in development. Adam himself isn't quite sure which direction it's heading.
With these carved limbs that I was describing, it's new, so I don't know how to really quite talk about it, but I think it's also born out of my own sort of dealing with some grief and loss, and I think just the notion that kind of came into my head recently, and I don't mean to say that to sound maudlin, it's not really that, but that there was something about, I guess it sounds cheesy, but trying to find myself again. And it's also kind of like automatic writing in a way. Like if I see something lying in the landscape or on the street or whatever, it's like, oh, that looks like a finger, or that looks like a hand, or that looks like a foot, or whatever, or that looks like a neck. I would take it. And so it's the idea of like seeing myself in these discarded dead branches in the world, and people bring me things from other parts of the world. It's like that reclaimed empire, like reclaimed body, reclaimed a reclamation. I don't know quite where it's going yet. You began this interview asking me like how I work as an artist, and I think that's really it. Like something about accumulation, maybe reclamation is in there as well. peering through portals. I don't know. Like they all sort of seem to bleed into the other. So for a long time, I was worried that I keep making these different projects and it all looks different. It's like 1 minute I'm doing photos, next minute I'm doing sculpture, I'm doing this, but it all for me really interlocks in this strange way. I don't know where it's going, but I'm sort of curious now. Like maybe Reclaimed Empire will grow, or maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm like Frankenstein's monster making a new human in my studio. Who knows?
That's funny.
Or making a golem, to like rescue us.
Yeah. The golem is a figure from Hebrew folklore. It refers to a being made of inanimate matter, often mud, who becomes imbued with a spark of life. It's an automaton. Automaton pops up across cultures: Galatea, Pinocchio, the Krat, and more recently, Barbie. As Barbie puts it, being human isn't something I need to ask for or even want. It's something I discover I am. Humanity, therefore, exists outside of humans. Life is not just confined to the living. And once you have this idea that life can exist outside of a physical medium, it raises the question, what other mediums exist besides the body? Our first guest, Deborah Levitt, has some thoughts on the subject.
There's one really famous cartoon from 1953 called Duck Amuck, and the star of the cartoon is Daffy Duck. And the whole thing is Daffy sort of coming on what would be a set and trying to start his performance. But first, there's no background. And then the animator, this hidden force, is changing the background. And he's like quickly trying to adapt. Then the animator erases him. And then the animator starts changing his body. But through all these metamorphoses, you as the spectator are still perceiving Daffy Duck as Daffy Duck. There's no real disruption in your mind. And it seems like through the cartoon, at least up until a certain point, the sort of anchor of Daffy in the real world, or the sort of ontological anchor, so to speak, is the voice, which remains the same. But then that gets taken away too, and he crows like a chicken, and he opens his mouth and makes a sound like a monkey or a car. So at that point, there's nothing really tethering Daffy Duck to Daffy Duckness, and yet the Daffy Duckness persists.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
We think of cartoons as just images, but this cartoon demonstrates that Daffy Duck somehow exists outside of that image. He has a soul, maybe a soul we impose upon him, but a soul nonetheless.
It's so interesting, like the persistence of character across all of these transformations. And I think we see that so much now in the ways that characters move across platforms. Like there are movie characters, there are action figures, there are video game avatars. And it does seem like there is a kind of life particular to animated characters. And that, okay, they're not biologically alive, but there's something meaningful, I think, about considering what kind of life it is that they do have.
Throughout this season, we've engaged with artists who have experimented with technological mediums to highlight the uncanny experiences of everyday life and to challenge foundational beliefs about our personhood and existence. Tony Oursler's distorted, disembodied video projections ask us to question death and identity in the age of advanced electronic communication. U5's self-surveillance piece blurred the line between identity and surveillance technology as their cameras began to seem like extensions of their bodies. Lorraine O'Grady's performance practice creates uncanny scenes of disruption and challenges viewers to consider a world in which something can be both and, transcending binaristic thinking. Adam Putnam's work interrogates the boundary between the physical body and space, creating an integrated world in which boundaries are not clearly delineated. Each of these artists have shown us that while new technologies have shifted the terms of what feels uncanny, the uncanny remains a feeling that we must contend with. Thank you for joining us for Season 6 of Tomorrow is the Problem. I'm your host, Donna Honarpisheh. Until next time. This episode of Tomorrow is the Problem is produced by ICA Miami's Art and Research Center in partnership with Frequency Media and supported by the Knight Foundation. Our executive producer is Michelle Corey. Our producer is Lizzie Stewart. Our scriptwriter and story editor is Isabel Moncloa Daly. Our script supervisor is Jessica Olivier. Engineering, sound design, and editing by Claire Bidigary Curtis. Visual identity by Julian Andrew K.A.